I had been tipped off to the NES Godzilla Creepypasta written by CosbyDaff several weeks ago by one of my subscribers, Rexy and Alpha Studios. He was really excited about having me look at it, always dropping bits of info for me and Snazzy to look at. I have to admit, as I sat down to read the story, I didn't know what to expect. I knew all about the creepypasta phenomenon. It was the internet age equivalent to the campfire story or the urban legend. Tales heard from a friend of a friend, short accounts of odd happenings meant to unsettle and terrify. Usually they came in two varieties. There were the strange creature creepypastas, from which originated Slender Man and the Rake, and there were the haunted media creepypastas, focused on the kind of things millennials would find nostalgic, things like cartoons and video games. From the sound of it, this Godzilla story fell into that second category, and my expectations were slightly lowered as a result. Haunted media creepypastas tended to fall into a predictable pattern. Snazzy summed it up best, I think.
The protagonist acquires the whatever it is under mysterious circumstances and proceeds to go through the whole thing without ever once bothering to turn it off. There's disturbing imagery, somehow dead children are involved, the guy is depressed by the end, and you're lucky if you get so much as a hint of an explanation.
He wasn't wrong. There was a kind of monotony to the whole affair, and I had no guarantee this Godzilla one would be much different, but I had promised to give it a look, and I don't break my promises. As always, I chose to reserve judgment until I'd actually experienced it for myself, so I sat at my desk and began reading. I had my NES Godzilla figure from Nika close by to add a sense of authenticity to the proceedings. Yes, I'm that kind of nerd. As I sat down to read it, I found that the formula held true. The narrator got a suspicious copy of the classic game Godzilla Monster of Monsters, which slowly became more and more unsettling and surreal as he continued playing it. New levels and new monsters would appear the further along he progressed. Soon, it became clear that the game was somehow sentient, and it was deliberately toying with him for reasons he could not begin to fathom. About halfway through, I took a break to rest my eyes and glanced at the Godzilla figure. Oddly, I found the head had moved so it was looking back at me. Naturally, I decided this was nothing unusual. I had probably just bumped it when I moved my hand. So the writing, though well done in its own right, was typical for this kind of story. The visuals, on the other hand, were another matter. Honestly, they were quite impressive. A great amount of detail had clearly been put into making the alleged screen grabs look as authentic to the 1988 game as possible, both for the familiar kaiju and the new monstrosities who appeared. I could only describe them as what might have happened if H.R. Giger had designed kaiju. He never had, by the way, though he did do creature designs for Tokyo the Last Megalopolis, so there's that at least. Despite the fact that, in typical creepypasta fashion, no context or explanations for these new beasts and worlds were given, I found myself drawn in by them all the same. For no particular reason, I glanced at the Godzilla figure again. It had turned and was directly facing me now. I figured it must have shifted from vibrations or something, so I continued ignoring it. As I kept reading, I felt mostly indifferent to the whole affair. I wasn't scared, unnerved, or even mildly uncomfortable, which was a problem since this was supposed to be a horror story. Lots of people seemed to enjoy this yarn, including the guy who recommended it to me, but for some reason, something about it just wasn't clicking. I looked to the figure at my side, and he suggested that I try a dramatic reading. Not bothering to question how this inanimate object had made the suggestion, I found a dramatic reading by Goji73, complete with voice acting and creepy music. Yet even this wasn't enough to win me over. Was I missing something? Perhaps I had fallen into a classic reviewing trap, waiting for lightning to strike and reveal all to me instead of meeting the work on its own terms. No, that couldn't have been it. I always reserve full judgment until the end. Heck, I'd even tried going into things with preconceived notions in the past and failed to retain them, loving things I had tried hating and hating things I tried loving. The NES Godzilla Creepypasta, however, was just sitting there like a lump of wet clay, and I had no clue what to do with it. Why wasn't it working for me? As I neared the end, the source of my disconnection finally dawned on me. This was about playing a video game, and that just wasn't scary. For as detailed and enticing as the narrator made every level sound, this was ultimately just a story about someone sitting in his house staring at a screen which he could have turned off at any point. True, a fully supernatural force prevents him from doing so by the end, but by that point it felt like contrivance. Watching someone play a scary game is not in itself scary. If anything, there were many examples online which showed that concept was better suited for comedy than horror. It was a shame that I felt this way, because the concepts presented in the game itself, especially in those eye-catching visuals, really drew me in. The creativity that went into each shot was amazing. The imagination, the attention to detail, and the hints of great expanses beyond that which the eye beheld were impressive. What sort of Godzilla story, a proper Godzilla story, could be told using these monsters and the worlds they lived in? My mind was a whirl with possibilities. When I glanced at the figure again,
What? You were expecting an explanation from a creepypasta?